No, really, I watched in real time last night a child die. She died of malnutrition. She died of hunger. Indeed, in the last 24 hours, 4 such children have died in Gaza of famine. And yet, just across a thin razor wire, thousands upon thousands of aid trucks are locked out of the Gaza Strip. The United Nations aid trucks, the UNRWA aid trucks, the Save the Children, Oxfam, all the names you know, all their aid trucks are lined up for hundreds of kilometers, waiting for Israeli permission to enter the Gaza Strip. Why they need Israeli permission is, of course, difficult to fathom. The trucks are on Egyptian land. The gate straddles the Egyptian and Gaza frontier. Gaza is officially occupied territory, although Israel sometimes likes to pretend that it lifted the occupation on Gaza some considerable time ago. Although that was a lie, it does further complicate the question of why these trucks are outside of Gaza when children are beginning to fall dead with famine, with hunger, with pestilence. The girl I watched die last night was a young girl, I don't know what age, maybe 8, maybe 9, about the age of some of my own children. She died whilst vomiting animal feedstuffs. That's right, patties made of animal food, the food you feed to donkeys, to goats, to cows, and her little system was unable to bear it any longer. I watched her vomit, and then I watched her die in the year of our Lord, 2024, when outside that razor wire was enough food to feed everybody, every child, every woman, every man in Gaza. This famine and the disease that is now rampant within the Gaza Strip is going to ultimately prove an even bigger killer than the murderous onslaught of the so-called Israel Defense Force in the territory. Mind you, they have already killed and maimed more than 110,000 people. 110,000 people in 4 months. As a rate of attrition, it's difficult to be in any conflict. As a rate of attrition of women and children, it is literally impossible to beat. This 4 months of onslaught has killed more women and children as a proportion of the total dead than any conflict in the entire history of the human race. And some of you are still supporting it. Some of you are still facilitating it. Some of you are still funding it, arming it, defending it in the United Nations and other international fora. Not some of you, of course, because this audience knows better. But your leaders in Western countries are the ones co-responsible for this slaughter. 112,000 people are either dead or maimed, wounded, with no hospitals to take care of them, or are still lying dead under the rubble. Imagine, if you will, seeing the shoes, the feet of your own child sticking out from under the rubble, watching the animals, cats and dogs, eating at her body, unable to do anything, even to retrieve your dead child for a decent burial. Imagine that, because that's what is the reality. That's what is happening to parents, to children in Gaza right now. The parents can't lift the rubble. You'd need earth-moving machinery to do that. And in any case, any attempt to do so would almost certainly lead to the death by sniper fire from the parents trying to retrieve their dead children. It's difficult to talk about all of this without your eyes moistening, without emotion overcoming you. And I'm struggling right now. I'm seeing pictures on the screen that you are of biblical scenes of people rushing to receive the tiny proportion of aid which has reached inside, who are almost every time fired upon by Israeli snipers. All kinds of depravities are beginning to be TikToked and appear on YouTube. You know, the wife of the Nazi commandant of Auschwitz used to go into the warehouse and pick from amongst the belongings of the murdered Jews at Auschwitz the shoes, the clothes that she fancied for herself. I saw a video today, you maybe saw it too, of an Israeli soldier gifting over the airwaves his wife a pair of shoes that he'd looted from the house of a woman he had murdered. He or his fellows had murdered her and gone through her wardrobe and took out her shoes and filmed themselves pledging those shoes to their own wives. Just what every woman dreams of, a pair of shoes looted from a murder victim. It is impossible to comprehend how these people are unable to see how others see them. As Robert Burns, the Scottish bard, said, the greatest gift that God would give us to see ourselves as others see us. I wonder if Israelis know how the rest of the world now sees them. And I wonder if they care a damn. Well, I don't care if they don't care a damn. All I care about is our own national dignity of not being a part of this, of doing anything, everything that we can to bring relief to the people who are a part of this. I don't want my government vetoing or abstaining from resolutions in the United Nations condemning this barbarism, this savagery, this genocide. I don't want judges from the United Kingdom protecting the criminals in the international fora of justice. I don't want my television that I pay for, the BBC, endlessly proselytizing propaganda for Netanyahu and these barbaric killers, murderers. I don't want the newspapers that I have walked past in the newsagent screaming from their front pages, lie after lie after lie, to give succor and comfort to these barbaric killers, who seem to have a fetish, by the way, of going through the underwear drawers of Gazan women that they have murdered, whose houses they have largely demolished. These fiends have fiends who are calling themselves friends of Israel. And it's to that that I now turn. I just watched a video of Labour shadow minister in Britain, Rachel Reeves, in which she called upon the police to act to the extent of their powers against anyone in Britain expressing anti-Israel sentiments. That's a new one on me. And she'll have to arrest me also. She might have to bring the police onto the parliamentary estate to arrest me, because I know that there are millions of people in this country. How could it be otherwise when we're watching all this on our telephones every hour, every minute of every hour? How could we not have anti-Israel feelings? They've moved from the conflation of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism to proscribe and make illegal anti-Israelism. So I can be anti-Saudi Arabia. I can be anti-America. I can be anti any country on the earth except Israel. Well, Ms. Reeves, I don't know if your party is going to make it into government, but if you make it into government and attempt to make that the law in Britain, you will be making millions of new criminals And the number of those millions is growing every day. So you better start a massive prison building program alongside any other plans that you might have, because you're going to have to put on trial a very large number of people. Now, the situation in Gaza is such that we have this evening brought back Dr. Yasser Khan, whose interview with me last week caused such a sensation, had such massive views, and caused so many people to shed a tear or two or three or four. Dr. Khan is joined this evening by Dr. Mughrabi, who is a cosmetic surgeon of great note, who was in the Nasser hospital until the barbarians stormed it and destroyed it, and is now in Rafah. If he survives, if any Palestinian survives the coming Ramadan onslaught of the barbarians, he's going to have a lot of work to do because of the disfiguring nature of the indiscriminate use of phosphorus bombs, illegal to use against civilians in urban areas, but which are raining down day after day and burning the faces, burning the skin from the inside of the Palestinian victims of it. The lacerating effect of tank shells and ship-fired missiles, the devastating impact of bombs, 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on Gaza. Many of you saw Oppenheimer. I did, twice. I marveled at the extraordinary destructive power of the atomic weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima and then a couple of days later on Nagasaki. Israel has dropped five Hiroshima atom bombs on the Gaza Strip, 25 miles long at its narrowest, 5 miles wide, in which, inside a cage, 2.3 million people, most of them women and children, are trapped. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. 5 atom bombs. Just think about that. On the subject of atom bombs, we came close, I think, to war between NATO and Russia over the last 2 years during this special military operation launched by Russia exactly 2 years ago. I doubt if the United States is able or willing in an election year to actually go to all-out war, inevitably escalating to a nuclear exchange, at least of battlefield nuclear weapons, but if one side began to look like it was prevailing, inevitably bringing in intermediate range nuclear weapons, ultimately, perhaps, an all-out exchange of intercontinental ballistic missiles and the end of the world. I doubt that Joe Biden's generals would allow him to press that button, not least because he might have thought he was pressing the button for the nurse to take him to the lavatory. I doubt that, but it is not entirely impossible. We'll be talking to the great Scott Ritter this evening about the 2-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine. But it's possible to say now that NATO has lost the war. Not that they've given up their determination to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, not their own blood, except their mercenaries, but they are ready to fund and to arm the Ukrainians to fight on. But more and more Ukrainians, including in the upper reaches of the army and of the political class, realize the scale of the gargantuan, ghastly misjudgment that little Zelensky, the clown, the dancer, the cross-dressing fool that they elected as president just a few years ago on a platform of bringing peace between Ukraine and Russia. Zelensky has badly miscalculated the fidelity of his friends to his cause. As the president of Afghanistan, as was, could have told him, when the moment comes that the West is withdrawing its support for you, you are left high and dry and lucky if you can get a few sacks full of banknotes out of the country. As the DM brothers, as the Shah of Persia, and many others learned, when you're dispensable to the United States, it can prove fatal. So, as we survey the wreckage, as we survey the cemeteries of all the people who've died as a result of this conflict, which has lasted since 2014, not 2 years, but 10 years, it is extraordinary to imagine the level of propaganda to which we were treated. And interestingly, useful and interesting, compare the propaganda over Ukraine with the propaganda over Israel's invasion of Gaza. The Ukrainians had every channel open to them. You weren't just permitted to advertise your support for the colors in Ukraine. You were practically mandated to do so. Your public buildings were turned into a celebration of Ukrainian colors. Whereas when the Palestinian territory of Gaza was invaded, well, you got sent home from school for wearing a badge like this. You lost your job if you wore a badge like this. You lost your job if you argued in the workplace in favor of Palestine and Palestinian rights. But the Ukraine now lies in ruins. Its territory massively less than it was 2 years ago. It's a truism, a given, that Russia is now winning the war at such a scale and pace that it is legitimate to wonder whether or not a Ukrainian state at all with any boundaries will be left at the end of this conflict. Many of you were confused why I kept talking over the last 2 years about a tiny strip of land in Moldova called Transnistria. Many of you wondered, where is this Transnistria and why am I talking about it? Well, as you'll quickly find, Russia almost certainly will take the entire coastal strip, including Transnistria, and link them to the Russian Federation somehow, some way. And that will include the Russian jewel of Odessa. I have been to Odessa many times. It is a truly wondrous, fascinating city. It was called the cafe culture. It was the first cafe culture before and ahead of Paris. It had 125,000 Jewish citizens when the Hitlerites and their Romanian allies conquered the city in the barbarous Operation Barbarossa. By the time the Red Army liberated Odessa in 1944, fewer than 5,000 Jews remained. The cafe culture had been wiped out. The cafe culture in which Jewish intellectuals, religious and secular, would forever argue over how many angels could dance on the end of a pin. In my time in Odessa, I used to try to imagine what that cafe culture must have been like. There can be no city in the entire former Soviet Union more Russian than Odessa. And I told you for the last 2 years that this war will not end until Odessa is a Russian city once again. And so it will be. And so the Ukrainian state that we are to be left with, almost certain, will be an entirely landlocked state. And the Polish and Hungarian and other revanchists may very well seek to recover the territory they consider Ukraine to have stolen from them. It's a sorry tale. It's one that need never have happened, should never have happened, and might have been averted but for one Boris Johnson, erstwhile Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. Should Ukraine sue for peace? Now is the big question on our poll. Please have your say on that poll right now. Coming up after a short break are two doctors that it is impossible to admire more, to praise more, to thank more for what they have done to try to rescue humanity in the benighted Gaza Strip. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows.